So, welcome to a Beta Talk podcast. I'm doing this one on video, but if most of you obviously listen to my podcast on audio, but if you want to go over to YouTube, you'll be able to see it as well. And I'm interviewing Rob Nezard, and his friend Callum is filming it for me. So, Rob, I wanted to speak to you because I saw a video of yours. It was actually one of my students I teach, and it's International Women's Day today, and I sort of teach for female students up in London. And they actually had seen your video about radiators. And anyone that knows me knows that I'm a very big advocate of getting people aware that it's not all about an efficient boiler or an efficient heat pump, because heating is a system. Mm-hmm. And the analogy I use is, Usain Bolt has a very, very efficient heart, but if you planted it into my system, I ain't going to be any more efficient. I ain't going to run faster or for any longer, because unfortunately I'm a bit overweight. And this is the same with heating. It doesn't matter how efficient your boiler is, doesn't matter how efficient your heat pump is, it's part of a system. And one of the most important aspects of that system are radiators, because they're the ones pushing heat into the home at different speeds. And you did this video because you've picked up on this whole, you sell radiators, and we'll obviously talk about that. You own a company called UK Radiators. And you've picked up on the fact that when people buy in radiators, whether it's plumbers or homeowners, and they buy them for a catalogue, there's a power output that tells you what watts them radiators are, which is joules per second of heat going into the home. And I suppose the word to use is a lot of them are fake, or the outputs aren't correct. And sometimes by quite a lot, which is what you picked up. So just talk me through that video you did, which is what inspired me to come and have a chat with you.
Yeah. So we've been aware for a little while that this is happening within the industry. So what we decided to do was to prove it, right? So the video has been a little while in the making, and a long time coming, I would say, because what's happening out there is that people are overstating heat outputs, to put it very simply, because it's easier to sell a product if it appears to be better than a comparable product from somewhere else. And so the heat output for a radiator is one of the most important considerations. As you said, like when you're buying a rad, you're looking at sometimes the design, sometimes the size and where it's going to fit, but you're always looking at the heat output because it needs to provide sufficient heat to the room. Like that's what it's for. And so, you've got a ton of distributors and a ton of retailers, and also manufacturers and factories. It's happening at every level of the supply chain. Are looking at these, are looking at their competition and thinking, well, how can we outcompete? And so what that's leading them to do is just to overstate the heat output of the radiators that they're selling. Like I say, we've been aware of it for a while, and it's been a long time coming, but ideally we wouldn't have had to do this. Ideally, it shouldn't be our responsibility. We operate within the industry. We're a relatively small player in the industry when you look at the industry as a whole. So it shouldn't really be our responsibility to police the entire industry, right? But no one's doing anything about it. And so the way that we look at it is someone's got to start shedding a light on this issue, because consumers are being ripped off, and we're trying to drive our country to a more sustainable, more sustainable nation as a whole. But particularly with heating systems, we're trying to drive the country to much more sustainable heating systems. Net zero is the aim, right? And there's a push towards lower temperature systems, clearly, which I know you're an expert in. And this isn't going to happen. It's not going to work if people are continue to be allowed to overstate the heat outputs of the radiators that they sell. And so I don't know. I mean, you can probably tell I feel quite passionately about it. It actually really winds me up because you've got people out there that they don't care. Like, they don't care about the product that they're selling. They don't care that it's fit for purpose. All they want to do is just sell more of it. And that isn't really what business is supposed to be about. Business is supposed to be about solving problems, and you're supposed to care about your customer, right? And so, we're taking it upon ourselves to make this video to highlight what's happening. It's much wider than the specific examples that we've used in the video. We're limited on budget for these types of things, because it's like there's minimal commercial gain from this type of activity. It's like it's not a sales video. It's not promoting our product to just sell more radiators. And there's also risk involved, right? Because there's some big players that are doing this. And so I don't know if you probably noticed in the video, we specifically didn't name the retailers that we bought the rads from, because some of them are pretty big. And we're not trying to get into any legal battles with anybody. At the end of the day, it's like I said, it shouldn't be on a single online retailer to tackle this issue. This is an issue that is across the industry, and it needs to be tackled at government level. But yeah, that's why we made the video. I think it does a reasonably good job of highlighting the issue.
It's a great video. It's a great video, and I'll put a link to it in my podcast show notes. And what you did in that video is you ordered 5 radiators from 5 different online retailers.
Yeah.
And then you took them to a UCAS accredited test centre in the UK. Now, there's only one UCAS accredited test centre, I think, who can test these radiators to see what their actual output is, and that's at MISREPORTIng, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which happens to be actually near where my students are. I'm probably going to try and take them to see that facility. It's nice to get to see other sort of aspects of our industry. So you tested them radiators, and like you say, you didn't mention where you were buying them from, but like you said, these are quite well known or big retail outlets. Because a lot of people now, as you know, back in the day when I started plumbing, people just sort of they'd get their plumber to buy the radiator, for instance. But as sort of the internet sort of came around, when people could buy stuff online, we had this whole thing of designer radiators. And it's worth pointing out, this isn't just a designer radiator problem. This is with panel radiators and column radiators. There's a problem with this kind of false reporting of power output, which, as we moved to, like I say, we should have moved to low temperature systems way back when the condensing boiler was invented, because that's the whole reason it was invented.
Yeah.
But obviously now people are talking about low temperature systems because of this sort of movement to put heat pumps in, which is the best way to sort of do things now. But it's completely critical that them radiators are correct, because what's going to happen is, you might get a very, very conscientious and competent plumbing company that really, really want to do a good job for a customer. They've sized everything up properly. They've done all their calculations properly. They're going to put some radiators in. They might have bought them online, or the customer may have done. And of course, what's going to happen, that property isn't going to heat up properly. And of course, the bills will rise. And of course, who usually gets blamed? It'll be usually the plumbing company. The customer might write into the Telegraph and complain about it, which what does go on about heat pumps. All because radiator, and I think this problem does exist with manufacturers as well as the distributors, doesn't it? It's a big, big problem. So you tested these 5 radiators, go back to the video, and some of them were way out, weren't they? I think up to about 39%.
Yeah, 38% was the highest one.
And that's a lot.
Overstated by 38%. Yeah, it's crazy. But yeah, it's happening at every level of the supply chain. So there's factories that I've discussed production with that have provided me catalogue data that I've then asked for test reports to compare against, and they're overstating against their own test reports. So there's issues right around this where I think there's a lot of brands of radiators being sold online in particular that haven't had testing done, right? They're just not, they're not carrying out the responsibilities that are bestowed on them under the regulations. I think some of them, they've never even read the regulations, right? They're just selling the product. They're buying it from somewhere and selling it, and someone's saying this is the heat output, or they're copying it from somewhere else and they're just putting it on there, and they don't actually know what they're doing. But there's levels in the supply chain where testing is happening. There are factories where testing is happening, and they're taking that test data and they're looking at that test report and going, well, that's a bit low. If I don't make that look a bit higher in my catalogue, I'm not going to sell enough radiators. And so they'll just inflate that heat output. They'll overstate that heat output knowingly in their own catalogue. And then that feeds throughout the supply chain. And
that's endemic. That's been going on for quite a lot of time, quite a few years, I imagine.
Yeah, and I think it's where we're predominantly on gas central heating systems. I think it gets missed or it's masked by the fact that you can increase the flow temperature to deal with these types of issues. So if very easily you can just put the flow temperature up of a boiler, right, and it's going to be less efficient and it's going to cost you more money for your heating bills, but you don't actually know that that's happening necessarily. And especially like you say, if the engineer gets the blame, right, if the plumber's installed it, you've bought a rad, right, he's come around, installed it for you, and then your room's not heating up, you go back to him and complain, it's quite easy for him to just sort of turn up the flow temperature a little bit, and then you're happy, right? The customers then, okay, I'm warm now, it's okay. And they don't really see the cost of that, and their heating bills will be slightly higher, but they just don't know that is causing them to have higher heating bills, right?
Well, you mentioned the regulations there, so I have to remember so many British standard numbers. So it's BS 442, or is it 422?
BSEN 442.
442, yeah. And that's the sort of the testing protocol for these radiators. Now, there is a Radiator Manufacturers Association. What's that called?
MARC, the Manufacturers Association for Radiators and Convectors.
And I remember a few years back they were discussing how, and I assume it's something to do with Brexit or something, about how the marking had changed. So there's supposed to be a CE mark on these radiators, and then that was going to, I think there was something in the industry, or talk of in the industry, where radiators couldn't be tested in European facilities. They now all had to be tested in UK facilities, which arguably didn't make sense, and that's what they were trying to explain. And I think radiators are now allowed to be tested in accredited European facilities, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So historically, that was always the case. As we were part of the EU, there's accredited facilities all around Europe, which have always been recognised as acceptable to testing because we were part of the EU. When we left the EU post-Brexit, a decision was made that everything would have to be retested in the UK to be able to be applied at a UKCA label, which is what replaces CE. So CE would no longer be recognised, UKCA only, and everything will have to be retested. The scope for that actually happening, whoever made that decision, I think, was wishful thinking, put it that way, because having one test facility in the UK, the conversations that I've had with Bisrea, that they've said to me it's just physically impossible. It will never happen. But so that's been pushed off now, and they've gone back to saying yes, we will recognise prior testing. But I think going forwards, any new product no, you are right. Yeah, so going forward, they will still recognise testing that's done outside of the UK as well, but only EU.
Right. So that's on one hand that's good. But there's a big but, is it looks like no one's really doing the testing, or if they are doing the testing, then they kind of then falsify it and up their little figures a little bit. Yeah,
so I'm not saying that everyone is doing that. There are brands out there that have been in this industry for a lot longer than we have, and my understanding is that they're legit and their heat outputs are legit, and there's independent third-party verification of those heat outputs. There's well-known brands that you would know and have heard of, right? And being in the industry as long as you have been. But yes, there are a lot of newer brands and younger, I would say slightly younger brands, and also, as I say, there's manufacturers as well, so various points throughout the supply chain that are sometimes testing and then knowingly overstating, and sometimes just not testing at all.
So how does this testing procedure, so let's say I want to become a manufacturer, retailer, and I source someone to make my radiators for me, and I assume a lot of them are being made over in Asia, I assume, or Europe even. And then I have a range of sizes. So we usually have a range of heights, we have a range of lengths, and then we have a range of types. So like a type 2.1, a type 2.2. Do I have to send a certain amount of batch to get tested, or a certain amount of sample from each size range? How does that all happen?
Yeah, so when you introduce a range of radiators, let's say, for example, you've got 50 sizes, like you say, 50 different variations, combined of different heights, widths, and number of panels or depths. You'll send that list of 50 to a notified body like Bisrea, and they'll say to you, we need to sample, let's say, 7 of those. It would be about the number. I know that because recently we've got a sample set of 50, a new range of 50 that was sent to Bisrea, and they've said that they want to test 7. So what they'll do then is they select the samples, We then send those samples across to them. They perform all of the testing, send back test reports, and then what they will do is for the rest of the range, they apply an equation called a family curve fit, and providing all of the products are manufactured, they fit within the criteria for what a family is. So they're manufactured of the same material, they're the same design, they are different variations of the same thing and not like actually something different. You will then apply that testing across the range of radiators. But what should happen within the test report is they produce a test report with the samples that have been tested, and it's clearly laid out in the test report which samples have been tested, and then there'll be a table of all of the rest of the products, and it'll explain how the test has been applied, how the tests from those samples have been applied, and the character equation, I think they call it, across the whole range.
So as long as they get this sample, and I suppose the height perhaps is more important than the length with them working this equation out that then covers the whole range.
Yeah, so they will always, so if you've got say 3 different or 4 different heights, they will always take samples from every height bracket, but they won't necessarily take every width. But you have to have samples from within every single height bracket to be able to work out properly the equation that you can apply across the rest of the range.
How did you get into radiators? Because it's a really interesting industry, isn't it? I mean, radiators are, on the one hand, they're something that the customer is really, really... I mean, if you say to a customer, what do they recognise in their heating system? So all plumbers out there will know that if a customer has an airing cupboard with a cylinder in it, a lot of customers call that the boiler. I think there was a study once when customers or homeowners were asked, what is the make of your boiler? And a lot of people were referring to the brand name on their thermostat,
right?
Which was interesting. But when it comes to radiators, generally, most people know what a radiator is. They know what that is in their home. And obviously, as we've said before, they start to buy these mainly around aesthetics, because you can get different colours now, you can get designer ones. What brought you into the radiator industry? Because it's quite an interesting industry to be in a way.
Yeah, definitely. So I first started in the industry in about 2010. So prior to that, I'd done various different things. I worked in sales. I didn't do great in school, so I wasn't not unintelligent, but not academic, if that makes sense. So didn't really go to school, put it that way.
Yeah.
So when I came out of school, I was always just sort of trying to figure out what I wanted to do, but I've always been just drawn to business. And so I've had many different businesses prior to getting into the radiator industry. Primarily, I found my successes, as small as they were, in e-commerce. So buying and selling various different electrical items, like refurbished items, things like that, and sort of selling on eBay just out of my house. That's how I started out. And then I wanted to kind of build on what I was doing or learn more. And so I started looking around to see if there was any other e-commerce businesses in the area that I could go and work for. And it just happened to be this one called Trade Plumbing. It was a website. They were selling plumbing and heating goods online. Everything from, tap, showers, baths, everything, boilers, and radiators as well. And it just so happened that radiators and towel rails was the only product that they actually stocked. Everything else was drop shipped. So I worked there doing customer service primarily. Very quickly was sort of promoted. It's quite a small business, but very quickly was sort of promoted to a manager level, customer service, and then sort of operations manager. Was involved in loads of different bits and pieces of the business. And me and the owner of that business, who his dad had been in the industry about 40 years, they've got plumbers merchants that they've run for decades. And me and the owner of that business, were sort of chatting and decided to set up a wholesale business to supply other online retailers. Because the way we were looking at it at that time, and this was in about 2012, was that there's tons of distributors in the industry, but they weren't really focused on the online retailer. The online retailer had come about later on. These distributors had been around a very long time. And it was more, they were more of they saw online retail as more of a problem than an opportunity. So for us, we thought, we can set up a distributor that will supply specifically online retailers and go out via, our route to market was only via online retailers. So we did that in 2012, and we did all right doing that. and built that to a reasonable sized business. And about 8 years later, in 2020, I bought him out. I've been building this business with my brother and my mum for quite some time. My mum's an accountant, bookkeeper. She was doing all of that stuff. My brother is also e-commerce, web design. He's a coder, so he actually writes code. And so bought out the business partner, brought my mum and my brother in as shareholders and directors of the business. We rebranded as UK Radiators. UKRadiators.com was launched in 2021. And then we've not looked back. I mean, at that point, there were decisions around whether we would solely focus on radiators. At the very beginning, the kind of dream with the wholesale business was to supply everything to every possible online retailer, right? Almost like an Amazon, but for supplying online retailers with everything that an online retailer could sell. And that was like a massive kind of thing that we had in our minds that was probably never going to happen if you actually think about the logistics behind all of that and the investment that would be required and everything else. But there were points that we were selling other products as well, like I say, other bathroom related products. But at that time, when we rebranded as UKRadiators.com, we took the decision that we were just going to focus on radiators because it's where the bulk of our business was coming from. It's where we'd gained a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience. And we could see that there was a lot being done wrong in the industry. And we looked at it and thought, well, we can do this better and we can be the best at this. We can be the best online retailer of radiators in this country. And that's why we called it UK Radiators as well, UKRadiators.com.
And plumbers and heating engineers and consumer homeowners, anyone can buy from that website, I suppose, because it's an online thing, isn't it?
Yeah. And we supply, like you say, plumbers, heating engineers. We've trade accounts for those guys, and then homeowners and retail customers can buy.
And the big advantage being, obviously, not that I'm going back on the tools, anyone, but if I was, the real fear I would have is my radiator doing what it's supposed to do? Because now you're putting in heat pump systems where you really, really are relying on that good understanding of your design. You've calculated your heat loss, and as a lot of us are teaching people, the average heat loss of a home in the UK, and obviously there's lots of different types of building archetypes, but the average heat loss is around about 8 kilowatts. So what that means is the home loses heat at a rate of 8,000 joules per second when there's a differential of 24 degrees. So it's 21 inside, usually we design to, and the average UK outside design temperature is -3, so that's a difference of 24. And so I need my radiators when it's -3 to be able to push in 8,000 joules of heat per second. So that's what I'm sizing. Now, of course, if I've bought radiators and that's not, and like we said, 39% down on that across the whole of the house, I'm in big trouble.
Yeah.
What happens is my customer's going to be well, they won't necessarily be cold because on a weather curve system, you just up the weather curve. But what happens is your compressor's working harder, their fuel bills are going up. And that's not what most good engineers want. They want that customer to have the lowest possible fuel bills. So being able to buy a radiator from a trusted authoritative outlet that actually is saying, well, this radiator can do this, and this radiator can do this, and I just pick the right size. Simple as that. And unfortunately, we all think we're doing that naturally. But, unfortunately, it's a bit sad because it's become a bit of a problem in this industry. And one of the episodes I'll probably discuss in the future is this is happening now with heat pumps. There's falsified test data now with heat pumps in Europe, and I've got associates in Germany and Denmark that have bought heat pumps that have had testing at supposedly accredited facilities, and they've been falsified. It's also happening with circulation pumps. So my sponsor is Grundfos. Thank you, Grundfos, by the way. But they are finding that a lot of the circulation pumps that are on the market haven't been tested properly. So they're not as efficient as what they're supposed to be with their ratings. So it seems to be a bit of a problem because obviously I think a lot of people realise this industry is changing. We're going through a transition, so there's lots of stuff that needs being bought or changed and whatever. And everyone seems to be jumping on the bandwagon maybe and trying to sell. And something as simple as a radiator, that's been going on. And we talked about the association, and I know for a fact this association is affiliated with the HHIC, who argue, there's some great people in the HHIC, but arguably they haven't probably done enough to promote low temperature heating, because that should have come around back in the days when we were pushing 2005, when we mandated condensing boilers. Controls from that time on should have been weather comp controls, not thermostats. Thermostats is ancient technology. So we have got a problem with this stuff, a lot of stuff in the industry sort of existing just to be sold. Do you think that now your videos come out, there'll be manufacturers think, right, we're going to have to really jump on this and start making sure our reports are correct? Do you think that's going to, because obviously that'd be a nice situation, but you know, I'm fairly optimistic sometimes. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. Do you think that's going to happen? Or was that one of the reasons you wanted to do it, to bring it to attention to all these other manufacturers? Look, you know, we've got to serve the customer right. Let's get stuff out there that's actually doing what it's supposed to say it's doing. Was that one of the intentions of the video? Because it was quite a hard-hitting video. You didn't name anyone, which I thought was brilliant, but it's a fantastic video because it's really hard-hitting. It's explaining very succinctly what the problem is. It's a very, very big problem that arguably my industry hasn't been talking about. But so are you quite hopeful some of the manufacturers will sort of start to really sort of get play ball and start to sort of themselves sort of get on, alleviate this problem?
Am I hopeful? I'd like to think that some would. I'd like to think that if I was one of those retailers and I was unknowingly doing this and I saw that video, I would then think to myself, well, is that me? Do I need to do more to make sure that this isn't happening? I'd like to think that, I mean, I know if that was me, that's what I would do, right? And I'd like to think that there's more people out there that are like that. And I think there definitely are some. I think with the ones that know what they're doing, I think it's going to take a little bit more. Yeah. I do honestly think that there needs to be enforcement of regulation. Like that, for me, the way I look at these things is like, why have a regulation if you're not going to enforce it? Like, what's the point of it? Like, if anyone can just do whatever they want anyway, why have you got it? Like, why have you taken the time to just so that some people abide by the rules and then others can just do whatever they want anyway because there's no consequence if they don't? Like, there needs to be enforcement of regulation, which is why the purpose of this video for us is to get signatures on our petition. That's what we want to do. That's the only way that we can see this really changing, is to get enough signatures on a petition that we can get the Department, what is it? Department of losing the names now. Department of Energy Strategy and Net Zero.
Energy Security
and Net Zero, exactly, yeah. And the Department for Business and Trade. If we can get them to really take this issue seriously and to do what they exist to do, which is protect people, right? That they're supposed to protect the consumer and they're supposed to ensure that everything is being done right. It's what, like, they seem very keen to set regulation, right? To set rules, but there's just nothing at the back end to enforce the rules. So, you know, that's what we need to see. We need to see proper enforcement of the regulations, because then things will change.
Is the association doing much around this area at the moment? I mean, we've talked about this Radiator Association. Are they doing? I had a quick look at that. I mean, the person that used to head that up actually has been on my podcast a few years ago. Lovely guy. I got on well with him, but they're not in the industry now. So I don't know who's heading it up now. Are they sort of keeping the momentum going around this?
Yeah, so my understanding with the Manufacturers Association for Radiators and Convectors is that the last few years since Brexit, their resources have been heavily taken up by this issue around retesting of radiators. That's what I understand, and you know, and I can understand why, because they've obviously got members that they represent. That have been members for a lot longer than we have. You know, there's founding members of that organisation that have been there since day dot, right? And they, you know, that's a very important thing for them, because if they were to have to retest every single radiator in the UK, yes, there's a cost to it, and some of these companies are huge and they could probably afford the cost, but there's a logistics issue, right? And if you set a deadline of a certain time and say, well, beyond this date, you're no longer allowed to sell your product in this country because you need to get it retested in this country before we'll allow you to do that. And these are people that do take the regulations seriously and want to abide by the law, right? that puts them in a very difficult situation because there isn't capacity to be able to test that many radiators across that many manufacturers by the deadlines that have been set. So that has been changed now, and that is a good thing. And I think hopefully that should free up resource of the Manufacturers Association to be able to focus more on this issue. It is an issue that they're aware of and that they have had focus on in the past. And so, yeah, I think just post-Brexit, everything has been dominated by this issue around retesting of radiators. But if we can put that to bed now, because ultimately it's like there was always a standard across the entire EU, and these products have all been tested to that standard. The standard hasn't changed, so why do they need to be retested? It's arbitrary, right? Let's focus on where the actual problems are, which is people not testing and people testing and then overstating.
Since you've been in the industry, have you seen a rise in people trying to sell radiators? Because obviously online, lots of people now sell stuff online.
Yeah.
So has that industry grown and grown and grown where lots of retail outlets, e-commerce stuff, is that growing? Yeah.
There's new brands popping up every week, right? There's very little barrier to entry.
Right.
And so, there's new brands of radiators popping up all the time. Those brands, I would like to think they just don't know what their responsibility are as a brand. So it's one thing taking a branded product from somebody else and selling it, right? Because that brand owner is responsible for the manufacture of that product and ensuring that the manufacturer complies with standards. But as soon as you rebrand a product, you become responsible because it's now your brand. And you assume all responsibility of the manufacturer. And so what we have is brands popping up left, right, and centre. They're just, buying a container of radiators from wherever they're getting it from and just putting them on the market. And there's nothing happening in between. And they don't actually know what their responsibilities are, a lot of them. I don't think they do anyway. I'd like to think that if they did, more of them would take their responsibilities a lot more seriously. But there's nothing in place to stop anybody doing that. Right? And there needs to be some kind of check in between buying the product and selling the product that ensures that it complies.
I suppose, because on the one hand, they just see it as a lump of metal, it's painted, made to look nice, and they probably don't. So there'll probably be some that don't realise the sort of the importance of getting this thing right, this output thing right. And maybe some are just selling them thinking, they just aren't aware of that issue. Whereas, like we've said before, there probably are some companies that know about the issue and just aren't really bothered about it. How's the signature thing going with this, with the rollout of getting all these signatures?
The petition is getting there. It's getting there. But anybody listening, ukradiators.com/sign. Just search that in Google, straight in the address bar, ukradiators.com/sign. It will take you to the petition. The video's on the page. Please sign the petition. I can't stress enough how important it is, to get as many signatures on that petition as we can, because it is building traction, absolutely. But we've got a long way to go. Put it like that.
Well, a lot more people are talking about radiators because obviously, as we're sort of moving into sort of more heat pumps in domestics setting, I end up involved in loads of conversations, probably more than I need to be on social media, because one of the first things people say is, every radiator needs to upsize. Well, a lot of the time, it depends what radiators are in your home. Not always is it. Well, it's very rarely the case. All of them have got to be upsized. Put it that way. But people are starting to talk about radiators, so that's a good thing. So there's a bit of an awareness. Since your video came out, have you had any other entities sort of approach you and want to know a little bit more about this problem, like from media, for instance, or local media or anything like that?
Yeah. There's been media coverage. It's been in a couple of online newspapers. The Sun Online picked it up, so it's been there. There's a few media outlets. Obviously yourself. And I think this type of media is in a way a lot more important because we can have a proper conversation about this, right? And people can get a much deeper understanding of exactly what's happening. It's definitely, it's getting attention and it's building traction. One interesting thing, I don't know, you might have some experience with this because you post a fair bit online, right? On LinkedIn and obviously you got your podcast and everything as well. one interesting thing that has come up, whilst like the comments are like overwhelmingly positive comments, you get comments, right, where people really do challenge the issue. What their kind of perspective, and it's often heating engineers, right, and their perspective, and I genuinely value the perspective, right, and I don't, I'm not trying to knock these guys in any way, because like I love the feedback and I love engaging with these people, right. But often there's a small minority where their perspective is it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter because, and various reasons that we've been given as to why it doesn't matter. Do you come across that at all in what you're doing?
Yeah, there's a big problem, and I'm going to be working with the installer show, Elemental Show, to try and help attenuate this problem. So one of the big problems as we transition is I think we're starting to lose value of what a good engineer actually is. So, and I always use my dad as an example. So my dad retired during COVID, 74. He only did oil, and he only serviced oil boilers and repaired them. He didn't bother installing them anymore. He used to work on massive industrial stuff back in the day. But, he retired at 74 and had customers old enough to be his parents. Now, the vital skill that my dad has, and some of these gas engineers, is, if someone's gone without heat and you're in your 90s, and you're in the middle of winter, you can possibly die without heat. So the skill is him going there and repairing that boiler. The skill isn't what I can do. I'm quite good with the science of heating, how it moves, and working out all these wonderful equations that we use. That's not what the customer wants. They want someone to be able to go around there and get that. And my dad is brilliant with oil boilers, brilliant. And it's the same with some gas engineers. Some gas engineers are incredible. There's so many makes and models of boiler out there that when they go into someone's home, that person might have babies or kids and young kids, or they might be elderly relatives. You want them to get that boiler going. It's an incredible skill. And I think we've lost sight about how valuable that is, because a lot of them engineers, rightly or wrongly, don't kind of know the science of heat. They don't know that heat moves at different speeds. They kind of, in their mind, thinks radiators have always got to be hot. So they're excellent at repairing boilers, which is a fantastic skill that's not being valued enough. But they just don't understand the simple things of radiators have never had to be hot. I mean, as I alluded to earlier, even in a 1960s new build with single panel radiators that needed to be 80 degrees to push that 10,000 joules per second of heat into the home when it's minus outside. When it's 9 degrees outside, it's still quite chilly. You only need to now push 5,000 joules per second into the home, and you don't need 80-degree water in the rad to do that anymore. It's about 53. But the mindset of homeowners and these engineers are struggling to grasp that. We've grown up with this idea that radiators always have to be hot. So they are fighting back a little bit against it. I can understand why sometimes, because obviously if you've got engineers that are really, really skillful at getting that boiler going again, and no one's recognising that value, and they're constantly sort of saying, you're not a great engineer, because this is happening on social media. You've got people now saying, I had an engineer come round to repair my boiler, and rather than saying, that was great, the heating's on there, they question their heating engineer, do you know much about heat loss or this and that, and the engineer doesn't, and so they're now saying, they're a rubbish heating engineer. And so there's some tension. It's arguably not the fault of the heating engineer why they don't know this stuff. Well, there's two things about that, because the ownership of learning is always on the person that wants to learn. So if you want to know this stuff, you plenty on YouTube to learn about it or whatever, or the SIPSI guides and all this stuff. But our industry was focused on safety. So when you install a gas boiler, there's this big thing about safety. The gas safe register is run by the HSE. So it's about safe installation. And unfortunately, the industry over the last 4 decades has sort of come away from the science of heating and what even at top level. So, I know for a fact people in the HHIC, most of them haven't got any idea about the science of heat, because they've just been too focused on their members selling stuff. So it's definitely not engineers' fault. I mean, engineers could do a lot more. They could actually start learning, because there's plenty of information out there. So they could do a lot more. And I think as one of the things the transition will do is, there are engineers out there who are discovering all this sort of science behind heating and they're loving it. They're lapping it up, because actually it's a good marketing device. If they can go around to these customers and start say what a watt is, for instance. What it's joules per second, because most engineers wouldn't know that. You kind of should, maybe. It's about heat. We're all about heat. So there is an element of fight back amongst the engineering community. I think if we navigate that road a little bit more carefully than we have been doing, and value what they can do, because it's brilliant what they can do. If you can repair that boiler safely, that's a great skill. And then and value them for that, and then help them, nurture them through this whole process of understanding the science of heat a little bit more. We might get somewhere. Yeah. Which is a big part of what I try and do anyway. But it's interesting the knockbacks you might get. That's interesting. I might do a little bit of research around it myself. How much do engineers understand about radiators? Because I think there's a lot of engineers will look at the power output of radiators, for instance. Not so much the ones now transitioned into putting heat pumps in, but they'll look at that catalogue power output, and I think they think that's what that radiator does at all times. Well, of course it isn't. If your room temperature changes, your power output changes, because you've changed the difference in temperature between your mean water temperature in your rad and your room. So that's what affects the speed of heat. Obviously your flow and return temperatures is going to have a big effect. So that power output changes, and I'm not sure everyone sort of understands that. So unfortunately, industry hasn't been great at helping engineers understand that kind of thing. But it's interesting, sort of the pushback you've been getting on that.
It's like I say, it's a minority, and amongst heating engineers as well. It is a minority. Like, we've had plenty of positive feedback from heating engineers, and a lot of heating engineers are frustrated with the situation. To see something like that and to know that that's happening, and to know that there's potential that you've been misled in the past, because these guys are buying, a homeowner's buying radiators once every 15 years maybe, whereas heating engineers are doing this week in, week out, and so there's a lot more potential for those guys to have been misled by this. And I think so the majority are like, this is bang out of order and something needs to change, because they're the ones that they know that they're the ones that are going to get it in the neck, right? When it doesn't work properly, they're the first port of call to go back to. But there's just definitely been some like a small amount, of just, and they're the ones you kind of engage with a little bit more, right? Because it's all well and good someone saying great video, amazing video and all of that. And yes, we thank them for that, but that's where that conversation ends. Yeah. But when someone challenges it and pushes back, like, that's a learning experience for both parties, right? And I reply to all those comments and engage with those comments, because I want to understand their perspective, but also try to give the perspective of why this is a problem. And you have a bit more of a back and forth there with those ones. And
have some of them changed their mind and sort of started to sort of realise?
Some, absolutely.
That's a good thing.
There's definitely a handful that have said, okay, that makes sense now. Like, some just stop responding, which I would think maybe is them accepting that. But some can be quite combative, so it's a difficult one, isn't it? Right? Because if someone disagrees with you and then you explain to them why they're wrong in the politest possible way, not everybody likes being told they're wrong, right? And like I say, we try to do it in a very, very polite and a nice way, but for some people, they just sort of stop replying. So you don't really know if they've accepted it or not accepted it. Yeah, there's absolutely a decent number where they will challenge it. You will explain why this is an issue and how this impacts on the cost of bills, effectively. And they accept it, and they're really nice ones, because it's like I've actually helped to kind of educate somebody there, and that's really nice.
See, and another important thing about radiators, and I've alluded to this on social media, but it's as far as you to actually talk about it in this sort of format, is there's a whole industry that's been built because radiators corrode, so that they're made of pressed steel, and that's kind of what's corroding in our systems. And we've had this whole industry around magnetic filters build up, and when that sort of product was first invented, all these sort of other companies that get involved in the OEM market thought, crikey, that's selling. So there's loads of them that sell this product now. But they never actually tried to solve the problem, which is why our radiators corroding so much. And the reason they were corroding so much is because we have high temperatures. So it's a physical thing. It's the laws of physics. If you have really, really high temperatures, it increases the rate of corrosion. Now, this year is the 60th anniversary of the company that invented inhibitor for domestic heating. Lovely guy, brilliant invention. People have lost the knowledge of why that was actually invented. They think it's because we had open vented systems. Yes, we did. And because obviously oxygen is a big part of corrosion. But it's the fact that we had, I mean, we're talking astronomical temperatures at 80, 85 degrees. And we had to have them high temperatures. The boiler needed that high temperature because there's this water vapour in a hydrocarbon flame that would condense back out and rot the heat exchangers, as we talked about the water jackets on a boiler. So you always needed these really, really hot temperatures, which meant we had a corrosion problem, which is why the inhibitor industry started. Now, that condensing boiler has been invented for quite a long time, 1981 that came to the European market, and we should now have reduced corrosion rates because we can all now have low temperature heating system. But unfortunately, the inhibitor industry, which is very, very attached to the radiator industry, I would argue, has never once mentioned temperature yet. You know, they've written British Standard 7593, never once mentioned temperature in it. And that's such a shame because that industry, the inhibitor industry and the magnetic filter industry are so passionate about saying how, you know, you could, if you reduce corrosion, you increase energy efficiency, or they've even been in Parliament saying it, and yet they're not really telling the truth. They're not, well, you know, say why really, you know, that there's been a problem in the first place, and it's this fact of high temperatures. You know, because radiators will corrode more if you've got massive super high temperatures in your system. It increases corrosion, and unfortunately, we've got this industry again that's just trying to sell stuff, perhaps not, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Evade the truth. You know, I'm not saying they're lying, but they're evading the truth because that inhibitor industry should be talking about temperature. It's silly that we've got the whole world now talking about flow temperatures, but they haven't, and yet that's what was causing the problem. And yeah, unfortunately, they're just about their cleaners and their chemicals. Well, that's not always going to be solving it if we've got still these high temperatures. So I'd like to see the radiator industry sort of talk about that a bit more, and they haven't. So it's like I say, your video was really, really refreshing because it's brought to light a massive problem that needs to be solved. It needs to be solved very, very quickly because there's going to be, if we transition and the speed of transition is hopefully going to pick up, and we're starting to put more low temperature system, even with boilers, you know, because all boilers should be low temp, they should be weather comped or low compensation. You know, we need to be able to rely on our radiators. So it's a big problem, and it needs to be resolved quite quickly.
Definitely. I didn't actually know that about inhibitor, to be honest with you. I didn't know that. I didn't. Yeah. So now you explain it, it makes absolute sense.
I don't think the inhibitor companies actually know it in a way. I mean, the most sort of famous sort of magnetic filter company I've been there. They've got a UCAS accredited facility where they test other inhibitors. Bizarrely, they're testing their competitors' inhibitors that are actually corroding metal, and that makes no sense. And they all come together to write this standard, and the standard basically is use inhibitor and use chemical cleansers, which isn't a great way of, as a lot of the good engineers have realised, of maintaining healthy systems. I mean, that some of them are using VDI 2035 methods. Some of them don't like using chemical cleaners because it's hard to get the chemical cleaners out. And then when you start mixing that with inhibitors, that actually causes corrosion. So unfortunately, a lot of these industries have marketing people at the high level. And, you know, I knew 3 of their marketing people really, really well, and they started to understand what the problem was I was trying to tell them. And then they've moved, they've gone to other different companies. So you've got this problem of where these big companies at top level, senior leadership team sort of level, that they're marketing people or accountant people that don't really know the history of the industry, have probably forgotten why all this stuff was invented in the first place. Same with the controls industry, same with the boiler industry.
Yeah.
They've forgotten why a lot of this stuff got invented in the first place. And to them, it's just about selling stuff, which is understandable. You know, all businesses need to sell their product or services. But yeah, it's a problem. It's a big problem.
I mean, I think it's similar problem. Exactly what you're describing there is the way I see like the radiator industry, especially the online section of the market that we operate in. It's like people just want to sell the product, but they forget that there's a purpose behind the product. It's there to solve a problem for people. And if you're not doing that in the best way possible for the consumer, then you've got, like, for me, from a business perspective, like, you're missing something, right? Because the business needs to stand for something. It needs to mean something. It needs to bring something to the world. Do you know, I'm getting a little bit deep and philosophical now, right? That's genuinely how I feel about it. You know, if I was doing something that didn't, that there's no way for me to have a positive impact, or to at least, you look at the product that you sell and go, okay, that solves a problem for somebody, and I can stand by that product because I know that it does what I say it does, right? That means something, and I think a lot of these companies, they're kind of headed up by just purely marketing people that forget that their products are actually there to solve a problem for people.
Yeah. No, you've done brilliantly, mate. Because I've been in this industry. I was born in it, so you're the first radiator distributor or retailer, whatever you want to call yourself, that's actually sort of said, look, we've got a problem in this industry. Let's do something about it. So good on you, because it's something that needed to be said.
Appreciate that.
You've done well. So thank you, Rob, for coming on the podcast. It was nice to meet you. And just before we go, though, on your website, you do panel radiators, you do column, and of course you do what we now term designer radiators, don't you? So you do all the whole lot, don't you? And of course, everyone's going to know that they're
legit.
They're legit. What it says on the tin is what it does.
Exactly.
And that's what we want.
Yeah.
Nice one. Nice to meet you.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.